Hey there, this is Kamal, and in this video we'll be learning about arrays. We'll try to understand what arrays are and how they can be implemented. We'll try to understand this by using a few examples inside of Java. So let's get this started. Alright, so first things first, what is an array? An array is a collection of elements which are all of the same data type. Meaning that you can have an array of strings or you can have an array of integers, and you cannot have both in the same array. Though some languages do give you the option to create array of multiple data types, in Java generally you cannot create such a thing. You can only have a singular data type for a whole array. All of these elements inside of the array are stored inside of a contiguous block in the memory, and all of these elements are indexed, meaning that in order to access any element inside of the array, you can use the position of that element inside of the particular array. And one major point is that arrays have fixed size, meaning that once you create an array with a specific set of values, you cannot delete or you cannot insert any new values. You can only replace the existing values. Though there is another way to overcome this by using something called as an array list. But for now, let's jump into the code and see how we can actually initialize an array inside of Java. So right now I'm inside of IntelliJ, and here I have a class called as ArraysEx, that is arrays example. Now inside of this class, let's create a main method. Inside the main method, let's try to initialize an array. So first you have to define the data type that you want. In this case, let's say I want to create an integers array. So I'll type something as int, then give a square bracket defining that this is going to be an array. Then give a space and give the variable name. In this case, let's say ArrayEx, then give a space, and then you have to equate this to something. So in this case, let's say I want to use a constructor. So I can do something like new, give a space, int. So this is how you create an array, but as I have said previously, you can only define elements inside of the array when you create the array, right? So in this case, I did not define any elements, right? So that means this is an empty array and it's gonna stay that way. But let's say I want to add few elements. So I can do something like this. I can add these values inside of the flower brackets, and now this array has those values. Another way that you can do this is by using something like, you can directly equate the variable to a flower bracket and have the values inside of it. This is going to do the exact same thing. Right, so now let's see how we can actually print these values. So I'll do this out, and inside of this, I'll actually use the index and get the element that I want to print. In this case, let's say I want to print the fourth element, right? So I have to type in ArrayEx, and let's take the second one, give a square bracket, and inside of this, you have to give the index. Now you have to remember that the indices inside of an array start with 0. Meaning that the first element's index is going to be 0 and the second element's index is going to be 1. So if I, let's say, want to access the fourth element, then the index is going to be 4 minus 1, that is 3. So if I do that and if I print it out, you'll see that 4 is being printed. Right, now let's say I want to access the fifth element, right? So that's going to be 4 and that should print it out. If I try to access an element that is not there inside of the array, then you'll get something like index out of bound exception. So let's try that as well. Yeah, you can see that there is no such element. So you're getting an array index out of bound exception. So this is a one-dimensional array. Apart from this, you can also have multi-dimensional arrays, like let's say a 2-dimensional or a 3-dimensional array. Let's see how we can create a 2-dimensional array. So in this case, I'll do something like int and 2 square brackets. So this is how you create a 2-dimensional array. Now let's add few values inside of this. So let's say I want to access the third element, that is this element inside of the array. So in order to do that, I have to use a similar syntax but a bit different, right? So you can see that in order to access elements, you use square brackets, right? Since you only have 1D, that is 1-dimensional, you're using that. Now let's say you want to access the 2-dimensional array, then you're gonna use 2 square brackets, right? So let's copy this. And I want to access the first index, right? This is 0. This is the 0th element. This is the first element, right? So I want to access the first element. Inside the first element, I want to access the 0th element, right? So that's what I want to access. Now, if I print this out, we should get 3. So let's try that. Yeah, so we still have this particular line, right? So this is obstructing the execution. Let's remove that and rerun. All right, you can see that we got the third element. Now let's say I want to update an element inside of either the 1D or the 2-dimensional array. So I can do something like ArrayEx2, and let's say I want to update this value. So it's going to be 1 and I want to update it to, let's say, 10. If I do this and if I now print out the second element, that is, if I try to print this out, you'll get 10. Alright, so now let's say I want to print all the elements inside of the array. How can I do that? You would think that you can just remove this, and ideally that should give me all the elements inside of the array. But that just gives me some random value, right? This value is actually the memory address of the array inside of your memory block. So this is going to be the starting address. So in order to actually print all the elements inside of the array, you have to use a for loop. So you have to use a for loop, iterate over all the elements, and then print it out, right? So you get the index, right? You get the index from I. You take that index, you place that here, and you print it out. So that's how you do it. As I've said at the start of this video, an array cannot shrink or grow. That means that once you've defined an array with set of values, it stays like that. Only thing that you can do is actually replace the values, which we have already seen. Now let's say you want to actually have a dynamic array which you can use to update, meaning that you can add few more elements or delete few more elements, right? So in order to do that, you cannot directly use the array that is provided by Java. Instead, you can use another thing called as an array list. It is there inside of the utility class inside of Java, which is basically a resizable implementation of the base array method that is there inside of Java. So let's try to see how we can do that. So here below this, I'll create a new array list. So it's going to be array list. As you can see, it's present inside of the Java util package, right? So this is the array list implementation. The main difference here is that you not actually use this, you have to define the data type of that in a different format, meaning that you won't define it like this. Instead, you will give the diamond operator, and in between that, you have to define that particular data type. And one major constraint here is that you cannot use the primitive data types, meaning that you cannot use something like int. Instead, you have to use the wrapper classes for that. In this case, it's going to be integer, right? Once you do that, there should not be any errors, right? So let's do that, and let's say array list is equal to new array list. Here as well you have the diamond operator, but you don't need to specify here because it knows that it's going to be an integer. Previously we used to do that in previous versions of Java, but from Java 7 or 8 I guess you don't need to do that anymore. Alright, so now let's say I want to add few elements to this particular array. So I'll do something like array list dot add. So once you add dot, you can see that it has a bunch of features that you can use. So inside that, I'm using a specific feature or a specific method called as add. Inside this, let's say I give it as 10. Now, the main advantage of using this is that you can directly print all the elements without using any loop. So if I do something like array list, and let's run this, you'll see that we are getting the value 10, right? The array itself is being printed. If I add few more values, and let's rerun that, you can see that the whole array is being printed. So this is how we actually add an element to this particular array list. Let's see how we can actually get an element. So let's say I want to get the 0th element, right? Previously we used to use the square brackets, but here since this is a different implementation, we have to use a get method. And instead of this, I have to define the index. So in this case, it's going to be 0. So if I do that and let's rerun that, you should get 10, right? So let's say I want to do something else here as well. If I do something like array index of 10, we will still get an array index out of bound exception, right? So that is how you do it. But let's say I want to add values to this at the time of initialization. So let's say I want to add values here itself. The way that you can do that is by using something called as arrays, which is a class itself, dot as list. So you have to specify that as a list, and instead of this, you can give the values that you want to input. In this case, let's say I want to add 1, 2, 3, 4. If I do that, all those elements will be added, and now if I print the whole array, you'll see that all these elements are being added and all of them are being printed, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 and 20. If I want to update an element as well, instead of get, you have to use something called as set. So let's say I want to do array list of, let's say I want to update the first element and I want to update that value to, let's say, 100. So if I do that and if I rerun it again, you'll see that it's being updated. Apart from these basic operations, you can also do few more operations. Like let's say if I do the dot once again, you'll see that you also have something called as contains. So you can check specifically whether you have a particular element instead of that or not. So if I do something called, let's say 100, if I do that, it's going to check whether we have the element 100 instead of our array. In this case, it is there, so we get a true. Let's say I want to use something like 2. Since we don't have 2 anymore and we have updated that previously, you should get false, and we do get false. Apart from this, we can also do some other operations as well. Like let's say I can stream into that and add or get the max value. You can also check whether the array is empty or not. Or you can give the element and you can get the index of that element as well. There are a bunch of operations that you can do, and you can explore onto this and see what are the operations that you can do in this, right? So as you can see, an array list is actually a bit more powerful than the base array that you get inside of Java. So that's how you actually create an array and an array list inside of Java, and how you can utilize that and do a bunch of things with that particular data. So that's it for this video, guys. I hope you have liked videos until now. If you did, then please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe as well. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.